The numbers were suicidal. A 1,000-mile round trip, over 400 men-hours of that deep inside enemy-controlled airspace. To make the intercept, they would have to fly for 2 hours and 10 minutes at just 50 ft above the water, skimming the waves. Too low for Japanese radar, but so low that a single rogue wave or armaments inattention meant instant death. They would fly in total radio silence, navigating only by a magnetic compass, a watch, and a single man's calculations. Their aircraft, pushed to the absolute limit, would arrive at the intercept point with enough fuel for exactly 7 minutes of combat. 7 minutes to find their target, kill him, and turn for home, knowing the fuel gauges were already ticking towards zero. This was not a mission. It was a statistical impossibility. A surgeon strike with a sledgehammer from 600 meters away, and it was all being risked for one man. To understand why America was willing to risk 18 pilots and 16 of its most advanced fighters on a single Hail Mary play, you have to understand the man they were hunting. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. He wasn't just the man they were hunting. Admiral Yamamoto, Japanese admiral. He was the architect, the ghost in the machine. He was the man who had conceived the impossible, the devastating, humiliating strike on Pearl Harbor. And the most dangerous thing about him, he knew America. Yamamoto had been a naval attaché in Washington. He'd studied at Harvard. He'd hitchhiked across the country, seeing the vast, sleeping industrial power of Detroit and the oil fields of Texas. He had warned his own government, pleaded with them that a war with the United States was unwinnable. "I can run wild for 6 months," he famously wrote, "but after that, I have no confidence whatsoever." His warnings were ignored. And so, like the disciplined commander he was, he planned a war he knew he couldn't win, by designing a single crushing blow to win it in the first 6 months. Pearl Harbor. For a time his plan worked. But then came the Battle of Midway. America, thanks to its own code rears, had turned Yamamoto's perfect trap into a disastrous Japanese defeat. But Yamamoto was still out there, still brilliant, still commanding the loyalty of the entire combined fleet. He was the brain of the Japanese war effort. As long as he was alive, Japan had a strategic genius at the helm. To American leadership, he was more than a man. He was a symbol, the man who had started the war. And President Franklin D. Roosevelt, Admiral Chester Nimitz, and Admiral Bull Hawley, they all wanted him dead. There was just one problem. He was untouchable, hidden behind 1,000 miles of ocean and scores of island fortresses. How do you find one man in an ocean of war? You don't. You get lucky? On April 14, 1943, a team of U.S. The Secret Itinerary, codebreakers, Navy cryptographers at Pearl Harbor, the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, or FRUPAC, intercepted a blizzard of Japanese naval signals. One of them, a high-level administrative message, was different. It was a high-level administrative message sent in the JN-25 code. The couriers got to work, and as the Japanese characters turned into English, their blood ran cold. It was Yamamoto's entire travel itinerary for an inspection tour of frontline bases. It listed his departure point, Rabaul, his destination, Balel Airfield, near Bougainville, his departure time, 0600 hours Japanese time on April 18th. His expected arrival time, 800 hours Japanese time, 940 hours local time. His aircraft, 2 Betty medium bombers, and his escort 6 fighters. It was a miracle, a catastrophic blunder of Japanese operational security. The message raced up the chain of command to Commander Edwin Layton, the Pacific Fleet Intelligence Chief. To Admiral Nimitz, Nimitz had a choice. To act on this intelligence would be to kill his greatest adversary, but it also carried a terrible risk. If the Japanese realized how the ambush had been set, they would know their codes were broken. The magic that had won the Battle of Midway would be gone. Nimitz weighed them against the secret. He made his decision. A message was flashed to Admiral Halley, commander of the South Pacific. Get Yamamoto. The order was simple. The problem was not. Hawley gave the job to the U.S. Army Air Forces on Guadalcanal. The target, Bougainville, was 435 meters away. A P-40 Warhawk, a P-39 Aeroco Cobra, an F-4F Wildcat. None of them had the legs. They'd run out of fuel long before they even saw the target, let alone fought and returned. There was only one aircraft in the entire Pacific theater that stood a chance. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning, the fork-tailed devil, as the Germans call it. It was a radical design. Twin engines, twin booms. It was fast. It climbed like a rocket, and it was rugged. If one engine died over the ocean, theater could bring you home. But its greatest asset, range. When fitted with 2 external, one 65-gal drop tank and one 310-gal drop tank, the P-38 could just theoretically make the trip. And its second greatest asset, its teeth. Unlike other fighters with guns in the wings, the P-38 packed its entire arsenal in the nose, 450 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon. There was no convergence zone. The pilot wasn't spraying a pattern of bullets. He was unleashing a devastating hail of fire. High explosive and armor-piercing rounds concentrated in a tight, lethal stream. Targets caught in its path were overwhelmed in seconds. The mission was handed to Major John Mitchell, commander of the 339th Fighter Squadron. And when Mitchell looked at the map, he saw their problem. They couldn't fly the direct 435 route. It was littered with Japanese-held islands, radar stations, and coast watchers. They'd be spotted in minutes, and the whole ambush would be blown. No, they had to be ghosts. Mitchell planned a radically different route, a massive L shape. They would fly far south out into the empty Pacific, then hook hard north, coming at Bougainville from the one direction no one would ever expect. The new route was 600-meter one-way. This is where the mission entered the realm of the impossible. The planes with full internal tanks and mixed drop tanks would have a maximum of approximately 800 gal of fuel. Mitchell's calculations accounting for wind, engine burn, and climb showed the mission would take a minimum of 4 hours and 30 minutes if everything went perfectly. Total available flight time from takeoff to landing, about 5 hours and 45 minutes. That left almost nothing, a tiny terrifying margin for error. If they faced an unexpected headwind, if Mitchell's navigation was off by a single degree, if the combat lasted more than a few minutes, they wouldn't make it home. They would simply run out of gas and vanish into the Pacific. Mitchell briefed his 18 hand-picked pilots. They were stunned. 16 planes would fly the mission. 4 were designated the killer flight. Their only job was to destroy the bombers. The other 12, led by Mitchell himself, would fly top cover, tangling with the 6 escorts and any other fighters that scrambled from nearby airfields. The killer flight was led by Captain Thomas Lanier, Jr., a seasoned, aggressive pilot. His wingman was Lieutenant Rex Barber, quiet, methodical, an engineer by training, a man who flew by the numbers. The plan was set. The math was brutal. And for the 18 pilots climbing into their cockpits in the pre-dawn darkness of April 18, 1943, it was a one-way ticket unless John Mitchell's navigation was perfect. 0725 hours, the Lightning's ambush over Bougainville, P-38 Lightning, takeoff, and immediately disaster. Lieutenant Mullanahan's P-38 blows a tire, careening off the runway. He's out. Minutes later, Lieutenant Moore's plane has a faulty fuel pump. He can't draw from his drop tanks. He's forced to turn back. 18 planes are now 16. The mission's razor-thin margin for error just vanished. For the next 2 hours and 9 minutes, the 16 pilots flew in absolute agonizing radio silence. This was the hardest part. Not the combat. The endurance. They flew at 30 ft. The salt spray coated their windscreens. The glare of the sun on the water was blinding. Every man was alone with his thoughts, his compass, and his fuel gauges. They fought drowsiness, the monotony of the engine drone, the sheer terror of flying so low for so long. Their lives depended entirely on the man in the lead plane, Major John Mitchell. He flew with his compass, his airspeed indicator, and a simple E6B whiz-wheel flight computer. He made 5 precisely timed turns, compensating for the wind drift he could only estimate. If he was wrong, 16 men would die. 0934 hours, 2 hours, and 9 minutes after takeoff, Mitchell makes his final turn. They climb from the waves. They are exactly where the Japanese message said Yamamoto would be, and they are 1 minute ahead of schedule. Mitchell's navigation was perfect. Lieutenant Doug Canning scanning the sky breaks radio silence for the first time. Bogies 11, hi, there they were. 8 specks against the clouds. 2 Betty bombers, 6 zeros, exactly as promised. They hadn't been seen. Mitchell's voice comes over the radio. Skin them tanks. The P-38s rocketed upward. The Japanese were completely blindsided. The Zeros caught flat-footed, jettisoned their own tanks, and peeled off to intercept. The 2 Betty bombers, suddenly naked, dove desperately for the jungle canopy below. Mitchell and his cover flight climbed, pulling the Zeros up into a fight they couldn't win. The killer flight, led by Lanier, rolled in for the attack. And here the story splits. Lanier, the aggressive ace, later claimed he peeled off to engage the Zeros head-on, shooting own down before looping back. But Rex Barber, he never turned. He followed his orders. He went for the bombers. Barber screamed down in a 45-degree dive, closing on the lead Betty. 500 YD, 400. He pressed the triggers. The P-38's concentrated fire struck home. Dozens of 50 caliber and 20 mm shells hammered the bomber's right engine and wing route, igniting a chain reaction. The wing buckled under the assault, sending the Betty into an uncontrollable spin toward the jungle below. A pillar of black smoke erupted from the green canopy. 1 down, but which one carried Yamamoto? Barber spotted the second Betty low over the water racing for the coast. Lieutenant Holmes, another killer flight pilot, made a pass and crippled its engine. Barber lined up again. He read the fuselage from tail to cockpit. The Betty burst into flames on impact with the water sinking in ruins. The entire engagement from bogies to 2 smoking wrecks had taken less than 3 minutes. Now the 400-mile run for home. The real fight began. The fight against the fuel gauge. They landed back at Henderson Field on fumes. Lieutenant Holmes Asengan sputtered and died from fuel starvation as he was taxiing. They had flown 1,000 mi. They had defied impossible odds. They had destroyed 2 bombers. But as the pilots climbed, shaking from their cockpits, they had no way of knowing if they'd actually succeeded. That answer lay in a smoking ruin, deep in the Bougainville jungle. The next day, a Japanese search party found the crash site. They were not prepared for what they found. The wreckage of the lead Betty was scattered. And there, thrown clear of the plane, but still strapped into his seat, was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. He was in his dress-white uniform. His white-gloved hand was still clutching the hilt of his family's ceremonial katana. A Navy doctor performing an autopsy confirmed the cause of death: fatal wounds from their attack. The shots had come from behind and below. For the Japanese high command, it was inconceivable. A nation in shock, Operation Vengeance from Guadalcanal, Yamamoto's death was a catastrophic blow to morale. The brain of the Navy was gone, but the true shock, the one that terrified them, was the how. The Americans had been waiting for him at a precise location, at a precise time. After flying hundreds of miles, it wasn't a lucky encounter. It was an assassination. This could only mean one thing: their codes were broken. But to admit this was to admit that every single naval operation was transparent to the enemy. They would have to change all their ciphers, an act that would paralyze their entire fleet for months. So they chose a more comforting lie. They concluded it must have been a fluke, a 1 in a million lucky patrol. They couldn't face the truth. And so they kept using the same codes. A fatal mistake. In the American camp, their action was equally quiet for a different reason. They couldn't celebrate. News of the targeted assassination of Yamamoto was suppressed. The secret of the code rears was safe. The story should have ended there. A perfect secret victory. But it didn't. Because the moment Captain Thomas Lanier landed, he had announced to the base, "I got Yamamoto." He told a dramatic story of rolling in, engaging the Zeros, and then looping back to blow the wing off the lead bomber. Rex Barber, the quiet engineer, simply filed his report. He had attacked the lead bomber from the stern and destroyed it. Barber's story matched the autopsy. It matched the bullet holes in the wreckage. It matched the testimony of the surviving Japanese Zero pilot Kenji Yanaga interviewed years later. But Lanfear was the aggressive ace. He was the story. The Air Force, in a political move, eventually awarded both pilots half a kill each for Yamamoto's plane. A compromise that satisfied no one. It would take decades, long after Lanier's death, for historians and analysts combing through every piece of evidence to conclude the truth. Major John Mitchell's navigation got them there. But it was Lieutenant Rex Barber who fired the killing shots. Operation Vengeance was more than just revenge for Pearl Harbor. It was a strategic decapitation. It was the perfect synthesis of American power, brilliant intelligence, superior engineering, and the profound skill and courage of seamen who flew the machines. It proved that in the vast impersonal mathematics of industrial war, one man could still matter. And for the Japanese, the shock that rippled through their high command on April 18, 1943 was a terrible new reality. The man they thought was invincible was dead, and the enemy they thought was thousands of miles away was in fact right behind them with his finger on the trigger.